You wouldn't believe what happened when I decided to put an end to an ATV shortcut that's been driving me crazy for months. It all started when I noticed a neighbor, let's just call her Karen, zooming across my property on her ATV, cutting through the yard like it was her personal racetrack. At first, I let it slide, thinking it was just a one-off, but soon enough, it became a daily occurrence. Now, I'm all for people enjoying their property, but this was crossing a line. So, I made the decision to build a wall right across her shortcut. Sounds simple, right? Well, it wasn't. What I didn't expect was her explosive reaction when she found out. She didn't just complain, she lost it. It quickly turned into a full-blown showdown, with Karen doing everything she could to make sure I'd tear that wall down. But here's where things get even crazier. She wasn't just upset about the wall, she started bringing in the HOA, trying to turn them against me. The tension was building, and I had no idea how far she'd go to get what she wanted. Did I make the right call, or is this about to spiral into a bigger mess? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. So, let me give you some context. I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and honestly, it's been pretty peaceful until Karen moved in. She's that one neighbor everyone talks about, but never really wants to deal with. Always complaining, always trying to bend the rules to her advantage. And her ATV was no different. Every day, she'd tear through my property like it was a racetrack. I'd hear that engine roaring up the driveway, only for her to cut straight across my lawn, kicking up dust and wrecking the grass. At first, I tried talking to her. I was polite, even asking if she could find another route. But all I got was a half-hearted shrug and an "I'll think about it." It wasn't long before I realized she had no intention of stopping. So, after one too many close calls with her flying over my flower beds, I made my move. I started building a wall right across that shortcut, thinking it would be the quickest way to stop the madness. The whole thing was simple enough, a few bricks and some concrete. But what happened next was anything but simple. Karen didn't just get mad, she started scheming. First, she tried calling the HOA, claiming I was violating some unspoken rule. Then, she started stirring up trouble with other neighbors, turning this whole thing into a bigger issue than I ever expected. Things were about to get ugly, and I had no idea how far she'd push it. As the days went by, I could feel the tension growing. The wall I built became the talk of the neighborhood, and not in the way I'd hoped. Karen wasn't backing down. In fact, she seemed more determined than ever to make sure I'd regret it. She'd stand by her ATV, glaring at me from her driveway, as if daring me to make the next move. Every time I saw her, there was this smug look on her face, like she knew something I didn't. But I wasn't about to cave in. I had every right to protect my property, right? Then, things took a turn I hadn't anticipated. A few days after the wall went up, I got a knock on the door. It was one of my neighbors, Jane, who lived a few houses down. She was nice enough, always waving when we crossed paths. But today, she wasn't smiling. She came with a message. The HOA had scheduled a meeting to discuss the wall. Apparently, Karen had been busy behind the scenes, calling in every complaint she could find about my property. Not just the wall, but my landscaping, my mailbox, even the way I parked my car. It felt like she was trying to weaponize the HOA against me, digging into every little detail she could find. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't realize how much power Karen had with the HOA. She had this way of making herself seem like the perfect victim, while everyone else looked like the bad guy. Jane, though, wasn't sure where she stood. She seemed torn, like she didn't want to get involved, but also didn't want to see the neighborhood spiral into a full-blown feud. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen wasn't just fighting to get her shortcut back. She was trying to make me look like the bad guy to everyone around here. The kind of neighbor you don't want to deal with. And the more I resisted, the more she seemed to get stronger. The clock was ticking. The HOA meeting was only a few days away, and I had no idea what I was walking into. Would they side with her? Would they force me to tear down the wall? I was starting to wonder if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. The days leading up to the HOA meeting felt like a slow burn. I could feel Karen's presence everywhere, like a shadow hanging over the neighborhood. Every time I stepped outside, she was there, lurking on her porch or in her yard, making sure I saw her glaring at the wall. It was clear she wasn't done. She was preparing for the meeting, and she wasn't going to give up without a fight. The tension in the neighborhood was thick, too. I started noticing more neighbors whispering behind closed doors or avoiding eye contact when they saw me. It was almost as if Karen had spun a story to everyone, painting herself as the wronged party and me as the troublemaker. I had no idea how deep her influence went, but it seemed like the whole neighborhood was on edge, waiting for that HOA's decision. I'd hear snippets of conversations when I passed by. What's going to happen with that wall? Or, do you think they'll side with Karen? It felt like the whole community was about to pick a side, and I didn't know if I'd have any allies. Then, the night before the meeting, something unexpected happened. I was out in the backyard, staring at the wall, trying to figure out what I was going to say at the meeting. I heard the distinct sound of Karen's ATV engine roaring to life. I looked over to see her speeding toward the wall, as if she was going to ram it down herself. She was furious, her face twisted in a mix of anger and frustration. It was like she couldn't wait to make her final stand. I rushed to the front, hoping to catch her before things got out of hand, but by the time I reached the driveway, she had already stopped. She was standing there, hands on her hips, staring me down. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. It was like the calm before a storm. I could see the fire in her eyes, and I knew whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to end quietly. But just as I was about to speak, Karen turned and walked back to her ATV without a word, leaving me standing there, uncertain of what came next. The meeting the next day was going to be the real showdown, and I had no idea what cards Karen was still holding. Would she have more support than I realized? Would she turn this entire thing into a personal attack, dragging me through the mud in front of the HOA? My heart was pounding as I realized that this wasn't just about a wall anymore. It was about everything we both stood for, and neither of us was ready to back down. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The next morning, the air was thick with tension as I made my way to the HOA meeting. I had no idea what to expect, but I could feel that everything was about to change. As I entered the community center, I could see the usual crowd gathered: neighbors, HOA members, the usual suspects. But today, there was something different. Everyone was watching the door, waiting for Karen. She wasn't just another neighbor. She had somehow made herself the center of attention. It felt like everyone was waiting for her to speak, to tell her side of the story. I wasn't the only one who'd noticed. As the meeting started, I could feel my heart pounding. Karen was sitting front and center, looking smug as ever, her arms crossed. She had clearly come prepared. The HOA members started discussing the wall, but before I could even open my mouth, Karen stood up, interrupting the meeting. She had a thick binder in her hands, and I could see her flipping through it, like she was about to drop a bombshell. "I've got evidence," she said, her voice dripping with certainty. My stomach sank. She began pulling out photos of my property, showing the wall in different angles. But then came the surprise. She had photos of my backyard taken from the edge of my property, through the trees. It wasn't just one or two pictures. Either it was a whole series. My jaw dropped. How had she gotten these? Had she been spying on me? It made my blood run cold. Karen went on to explain how she had discovered that I had been violating privacy laws, claiming that the wall I built was obstructing her right to free movement through the neighborhood. But what really caught me off guard was when she pulled out a statement from a local law firm. According to this lawyer, my actions could actually be breaking some zoning laws I didn't even know existed. It was all too much. She wasn't just playing dirty, she had taken this whole situation to a new level, and now she had the legal backing to back it up. I looked around at the room, and I could see some of the HOA members nodding, whispering to each other. It felt like I was losing control. Karen had turned the table, using tactics I hadn't even considered. This wasn't just a petty neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a full-scale legal battle, and she was playing to win. The room fell silent as I stood there, realizing just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. The break felt endless. I sat there, trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. Karen had played her cards perfectly, way better than I'd ever anticipated. She had the HOA members questioning everything, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. And to top it all off, I was just sitting there, stunned, not knowing how to fight back. But then something unexpected happened. As the break was winding down, Jane, the neighbor who'd warned me about the meeting, quietly walked up to me. She gave me a look that said everything without saying a word. I leaned in, and she whispered, "You're not alone in this. We've all been talking, and we know what's really going on." Before I could respond, Jane slipped me a small envelope. It was thick with papers, and I quickly realized it was a set of documents, photos of Karen's property, detailed records, and a map of the neighborhood. What caught my eye was the map. It showed exactly how Karen had been cutting through my yard before the shortcut was even there. It turned out Karen had been using my property to bypass a sharp curve in the road for years, long before I ever built that wall. And according to the photos, she'd been doing it illegally. My jaw dropped. Karen wasn't just messing with me, she was trespassing. The meeting resumed, and as Karen continued to lecture everyone, I stood up, holding the envelope. The room went quiet as I slammed the documents on the table in front of the HOA. "I think it's time for some honesty," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I flipped through the photos and documents, laying out the evidence. The room was in complete silence as I revealed how Karen had been using my property for her personal benefit for years, and how I'd only taken action after countless warnings. Karen's face turned ashen. For the first time in the meeting, she seemed rattled. She tried to interrupt, but I wasn't done. "These documents prove she's been trespassing, and I have every right to protect my property," I continued. I could feel the eyes of the HOA members on me now, and the power had shifted. But just as I thought I'd won, Karen dropped a bombshell of her own. With a smirk, she pulled out her own set of papers. "Nice try," she said, her voice cold. "But I've already spoken to the local authorities about this wall. It turns out, I'm not the only one who's been keeping an eye on the property lines." Before anyone could react, the HOA president spoke up. "It seems we have a situation where neither party is fully in the clear. We'll need to investigate further." But just as it seemed like the fight would drag on forever, I caught something in the president's tone. It wasn't just a decision, it was a warning. The investigation would drag on, but Karen had underestimated something crucial. She had no idea that the HOA had been looking into her property for a completely different reason. Apparently, Karen had been making complaints about everyone in the neighborhood, filing grievances that had put her on the HOA's radar. They weren't just concerned with the wall, they were concerned with her behavior. And as the meeting came to a close, Karen shot me one last, deadly glare. The battle wasn't over, but as I walked out of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both in for a lot more trouble than either of us had bargained for. The twist? The HOA had already started looking into *** actions, and that was something she hadn't seen coming.